actually. Karen and I are pleased to have you with us, and a little bit of housekeeping. If we have to get out of here fast for whatever reason, there is a door in the corner here, and the big wooden door that a lot of people don't know actually is a door. And I'm going to ask you to turn off your phones and other distracting devices. And the setup tonight is I'm going to do a brief intro, and then first I'm going to do a little advanced announcements of events, then a brief intro, and then Archer has the floor, and then the cookies and what's left of the cider and all the books are in the front. He's going to stay back here and sign books, and that way we'll have room to move around. And for those of you who have been here before, you know the deal about kicking the back of your chair and leaning against the wall. If this doesn't make any sense to you, just watch your neighbors. So we do have an incredibly full calendar of events coming up. And to just mention a few, there's a novelist called Caitlin Greenidge who will be reading at Dartmouth College on the 19th, which is a Thursday. And then back here again on a Wednesday on the 25th, Cy Montgomery and Elizabeth Marshall Thomas are going to be reading from their collaborative book, which is called Tamed and Untamed, Close Encounters of the Animal Kind. And they're both fascinating women with their knowledge of animals. And then early November, we have what we call our discussion circles, and they're way more informal. We set up in a circle in this area here. And we have the author, Robert Madrigan, coming to speak on his book, The Solace of Trees. We've had a few of these. They've been very successful, and we invite you to join us for that. And then the following week, we have never done this before. We have a trucker coming to give us a talk. His book is called Long Haul, A Trucker's Tale of Life on the Road. And what has never happened before is he's coming in his 18-wheeler, which will be parked out front. I made arrangements with the police this morning that we can do that.
You're going to sell books out of that?
I don't know. I think we'll probably be in the store. But that should be, he sounds like a real character, so that should be fun. So we encourage you to sign up for our newsletter, and we encourage you to sign up for events. Even when we don't have a full and overflowing house like we do tonight, thank you, Archer, we take reservations so that we know how many cookies and how much cider. So that's the announcements. As I mentioned, Archer really almost needs no intro for Trace, his 28th book in the Joe Gunther series. And after 23 other presentations here at the Norwich Bookstore, how many people have never heard Archer speak? Whoa. Great, okay. You're in for a treat. As many of you know, Archer is a death investigator for Vermont Office of Chief Medical Examiner and a detective for the Windham Office of the Windham County Sheriff's Office. That, and in addition to 25 years of experience as a volunteer firefighter EMT, those things definitely inform the storytelling he does in his series. And that actually led the New York Times to call him, quote, the boss man on procedures. He's also the publisher of his own backlist and a travel writer for AAA. The Joe Gunther books, which have been appearing about once a year since 1988, have been published in 5 languages, and this is a quote, if you count British, often appearing on Publisher 10 Best Yearly lists. He's a past winner of the New England Independent Booksellers Award for Best Fiction, which is the first time a writer of crime literature was so honored. And I have to say personally, it's fascinating to see how his characters mature, even if they don't age like us mere mortals. Without giving anything away, I wanted to say that as a manager of a bookstore, it was very interesting to read Joe's role this time. Like him, I find it immensely rewarding and occasionally nerve-wracking to have to step aside and let the team take over. Please welcome Archer Miller.
Comes a test. Who can't hear me? First, if you raise your hand, you just lied. Hell of a test. Can you hear me in the back?
No.
My wife's in the back, and she has stopped listening to me years ago. She doesn't count. And then my sister's next to her, and my brother's in front of them, and half of you are actually related to me, so you're not going to hear anything new tonight. Yeah, I convinced you, didn't I?
Well, I put him down.
Sorry. And now I'll talk like I also stand up because I make a harder target. And also, usually there's someone hiding behind that central column, so don't try that, because I'll find you. 28, good Lord. The reason I hesitated is because 29 is already finished, and I'm editing it. And the house is unlocked. If you know where I live, now's your opportunity. Margot just looked at me horrified. The house is locked. I was fiction, for God's sake. So anyhow, this time I decided to step out a little bit. I mean, after 27 books even, I'm getting bored. I mean, for God's sake, you know. The guy doesn't age, that means you're stuck with him forever. All my parentage lives to be their late 90s, so I'm going to be writing and writing and writing. And the pay is still miserable enough that I'll be in the old folks' home still writing. So don't expect Joe Gunther to age along with the rest of us. It just ain't going to happen. But he will occasionally fade away. And he's done this in previous books, but he does so big time this time because Joe Gunther, who, as you remember, is pushing mid-80s himself, has a mother who says ageism is, you know, a crime. I embrace it. So Mom isn't feeling too well in this book. Don't worry, we're not about to knock her off. Actually, little parenthetical comment. Raise your hand if you know Mom's first name. I don't know it either. I never named her, I just forgot. And then, you know, book 346, and I went, oh, you know, if someone walks in and he's trying to be semi-formal, so he reads her whole name. And I had to go back, and I'm going, oh, gee, I don't know why Agnes was running my, so I checked that, and, you know, now you can do sort of spell checker, although my very early books are on floppy disks, so that wasn't going to do me any good. It doesn't exist. I actually spent an egregious amount of time checking this out. So anyhow, Mrs. Gunther is not feeling well. Joe, the doting son, takes care of her, and therefore eclipses himself from the book. Why, you may ask? Well, ask someone other than me, but I made it happen anyhow. And the reason being is that Joe is the head of this team, otherwise made up of, I always hold up the wrong number of fingers, 3 investigators. Your favorite, Willie. He, for the uninitiated, is the dysfunctional one. They all love him, but you'll never mind. So Willie Kunkel, Sammy Martins, who's a girl, and Lester Spinney. So my plan, having been a cop and having run investigations and done all that stuff, I'm semi-retired, you'll be glad to know. I'm almost out of it. Not the dead people, though. I love the dead people, so I'm not giving that up. But it occurred to me that on a really good day, on a light workload day, I would have something like 13 cases going simultaneously and maybe more. So if you watch TV and watch the movies and all the rest of it, you know, you are challenged to find any cop, or for that matter, any squad of 5 cops, like let's think of one of those Law and Order movies, right, in which they are focusing on more than a single case. So you're getting 5 of New York's finest in a city of 6 million people, and they're all chasing one bad guy, okay? It doesn't happen. I was working in Brattleboro, for God's sake, you know? And I had 13 to 20 cases going on at the same time, and all my buddies did too. We didn't think anything about it. So, first of all, being sort of an evil child, the bottom of 6, I, of course, immediately thought, oh, I know, I'll take all 4 guys. I won't put Joe on vacation. So all 4 investigators will each have 20 cases each, and I'll put it all in one book. But then I realized that both you and I rather enjoy my career, so I decided against that. So what I've done is a compromise. So what I've done is get rid of Joe temporarily. Not that he's too manic, to totally abandon ship, so he'll keep in touch by these electronic toys we all carry around. Well, you all carry around, I don't. But each investigator will have one case, and they will chase that case. So the challenge to me was, okay, so I've cleaned it up a little bit, but you're going to have to follow 3 unrelated cases. Now, I described this idea early on when I was just thinking of the notion, and several people's eyes lit up and they went, oh, how cool is that? And then at the very end, just like, Murder, She Wrote or something like that, they'll all come together and you'll have a single bad guy. I went, no. There are 3 separate cases, that's the way they stay. So the challenge is to read the book. If I've done my work right, the early reviews tell me I have, and you'll be able to sort of see what it's like, because these cops, they're running in all sorts of directions, but they compare notes with each other because we all read each other's homework to help each other out. So you get this community sense between these 3 guys, with Joe hovering out there, I don't know, in Dubuque or wherever I buried him, and then he comes back at the tail end. So that's what Liza was sort of alluding to about, the mother leaving the hen house and all the chickens going crazy. And indeed they do sort of go crazy, because one of these cases is primarily, well, not primarily, but largely focused in Albany, New York. So that's Sam Martin's has to go out to that one. Another one partially also takes place in Springfield, Massachusetts, with occasional trips to Windsor, Vermont, because these are Vermont cops after all, so they have to come home. And Lester's a little more oblique, because his is a cold case, so there is no physical spot anymore, so he sort of travels around more in southern Vermont and sticks his nose where it doesn't belong. You may notice there's a commonality to all the places I mentioned. They're all dumps. Now, this is the background. This is actually how the whole sequence started. Margot and I and my agent and other people were sitting around at lunch, and I don't eat lunch, so I was watching them masticate, which only goes so far. Now, it's a repetitive gesture, so my attention wanders. And so I'm looking at it as an outside restaurant, and I'm looking up and down. Well, we're in Albany, as it turns out, because there's a lot of convention space in Albany, because everybody's left town in the middle of the day. They all run away from Albany. So the place was empty, the roads were empty, even though they were like 4 columns wide. Nothing was happening on this weekend. It was a weekend. That was, during the weekday it's different. But during the weekend, Albany just empties. So I looked around, and we had walked around a little bit, and I loved it. It was so my kind of town. And I said, I got to write a book, at least partially, which is based in Albany, New York. And I was rewarded in this decision by every single person around the table saying, are you nuts? This is a terrible town. You're just going to push people away. No one's ever going to buy this book. They're going to hear that it partially takes place in Albany, and that'll be the end of it. What are you going to do with your next life? So I was therefore thoroughly encouraged. I did mention being the bottom of 6. So I see this as a total green light, and I forged ahead. And then there was this big debate about, okay, well, if you're going to ruin at least part of the book by making it take place in Albany, where else are you going to have this take place? And so Springfield, Massachusetts came up, and there was a similar response. And so I was introduced to someone who is the booster of Springfield, Massachusetts, and there is one. He's retired, but nevertheless, he's very jolly, he's very rich, and he's very enthusiastic about Springfield. In fact, he sees Springfield as the great oasis of the Northeast. This is where all of you will learn to flock to when you have cultural needs. I know that's a little hard to envision, but welcome to his world. So I had lunch with him in the restaurant he owns. Yeah. And he didn't pick up the tab, I noticed, but and we're going back and forth, and he's telling me about his Springfield. And I gotta say, it's a glorious place. It's a glorious place. It's perfect. It's immaculate. There's no crime. There's no disagreements. Everybody's happy. The politics are clean. And when you wake up, you're already wearing your clothes and your bed's already made. It's an extraordinary environment. It's a wonderful place. And so I thanked him for his time. And then, of all the characters, to tell us about his visit to Springfield, Massachusetts during the course of this book, who did I choose?
Willie.
So I haven't mailed this guy his free copy of the book yet, because everyone who helps me gets a free copy of the book. And I don't want to kill him. That's what's going to happen. You know, he's going to read the book. Or he's going to kill me. He's got the money to do it. So well, you haven't given me his address yet. I noticed that. I actually asked Margot a long time ago, give me this guy's mailing address so I can send him his book. You're a wise woman. Anyhow, so there we go. And last but not least is Windsor, but at least Windsor can take it on the chin. You know, that's sort of old stomping grounds of mine. And actually, you know, do you guys like it when I read something or not?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll do Windsor. Because there's something that goes on in Windsor that I kind of like. And given that it's me, prepare yourselves. Abigail Elizabeth Murray was 10 years old, precocious, stubborn, and willfully independent. Fortunately for her, as far as she was concerned, she also lived in Windsor, Vermont. According to whatever adult was opining, this was a mixed blessing, because Windsor was either an old industrial New England throwback, out of luck and void of options, or it was the historic cradle of Vermont's Constitution, quaint, pretty, ripe for improvement, and poised to make a comeback if only the right combination of money and entrepreneurship would recognize and finance its potential. None of which interested Abigail. She lived in a tiny rental on Jarvis Street, high on the bank of the Connecticut River, with her mishmash of a family consisting of her mother, her mother's boyfriend, and 3 siblings, each with a different last name. The boyfriend called it a box of gerbils, but to Abigail, in the spring and summer at least, it was the jumping off spot for heaven on earth. She didn't care that its waterfront location, potentially prime in any other town, was on a pothole dead-end avenue trapped between the garbage-strewn riverbank and the remnants of a torn-down Goodyear factory suspected of being an industrial waste site. In her view, the virtual wasteland separating her street from the village farther inland was a playground at once vast and intricately confusing. In successive parallel swatches from the river toward Main Street high on the bluff, it had dark old conduits designed for industrial runoff, abandoned ancient buildings filled with mysterious offerings, acres of concrete slab littered with piled treasure, and a railroad track that marked its boundary like the dotted line on a printed form, the lower half of which was designed to be removed and discarded. Abigail loved Windsor. This morning, with the night's chill just yielding to the sun rising over the New Hampshire hills on the far shore, she was rooting alongside the railroad tracks, looking for anything interesting. Unlike her friend, she enjoyed this time of day, and in general happily rolled out of bed to greet it. The domestic noises she lived with hadn't begun, few people were up and traveling within the neighborhood, and the air outside was quiet and fresh and starting to get warm, which was always a plus. Abigail liked winter, but spring and summer were like her mom's embrace, soft and warm and filled with good smells. Railroads fascinated her with their locomotives larger than her house, their carriages filled with people destined for mysterious places. In Windsor, the old station house had been converted into a fancy restaurant, leaving passengers to detrain on the concrete slab just shy of it. Something she sought emblematic of the whole town, not that she could have put that thought into words. Nevertheless, whenever she could, she made a point of witnessing Amtrak's 2 scheduled stops per day, one northbound, the other south, just to see who was getting on or off. She rarely recognized anyone. That wasn't the point. In fact, the enjoyment was only enhanced by ignorance. Who were they? What were they up to? And what had they seen beyond Abigail's horizons? But if the train was nowhere near as now, she still had the tracks to entertain her, if illegally, and there again she was often mesmerized by what she found. Despite her having been told that the carriages were tightly sealed, incapable of leaving more in their wake than a passing thought, she found something new every time she explored. She slowly processed everything from discarded pens and lighters and crumpled scraps of paper to odd hunks of metal, a cell phone or two, and weirdest of all, a toy soldier with a small parachute still attached, which now resided near her bed at home. Weirdest that was, until today. She crouched down, the picture of a child in near desolate landscape, like a scrap of humanity scrounging for discarded bits of rice, and eagerly gathered up her discovery. Nestled in her palm were 3 broken, blood-stained teeth. That's my Windsor. When I was in uniform, I worked in Bellows Falls, which is, you know, like the sister city. We all have sister cities. They're usually in Japan or in, ours is just up the river. So half the now Windsor department used to work for the Bellows Falls department. We get very restless when you work in towns like that because it's so repetitive. You keep arresting all the same 50 people that you need to occasionally decamp so you can arrest 50 different people. And that's how it works. So the sergeant there is a real friend of mine. And I picked his brain. We cruised all over the place and dug around in the most revolting little nooks and crannies. But as Margot points out, these are my peeps. And this is my comfort zone. I sort of love these towns. So it had to be that that's where Willie would also end up. And so he does, because of that railroad. And all of a sudden it occurred to me that railroads, late breaking news, have to go somewhere. And by God, this one goes to Springfield. Thank you very much. Damn, see, not everyone fell asleep. Sure enough, he's also going to, so tight. So he also makes a trip down to Springfield. But of course, if you've got a railroad track, and you got Springfield, and you got Windsor, how is Willie going to get from one to the other? By what means? Well, duh, take the train. Why? Because that means the author gets to ride the train. So I contacted a friend of mine who had just retired as an engineer, and I got to ride the big thing. Up front there, 17 feet above the tracks. I described that experience as riding a hippo on tiptoes. It is the most extraordinary sensation to be above those. Those tracks are only that far apart, as it turns out. When you're on top of this 60,000-ton behemoth that has no way of stopping if it wants to. And you have this running conversation with the engineer who is about over where you are, you know, that's the buddy system. And he's telling you about, oh yeah, occasionally running into tractors and pickup trucks and And he tells me that the worst are gas trucks, you know, because then you see them coming because you're not going to stop, you know. Then he tells me exactly where to drop and crawl because all that gas is going to go right through the windshields. This was his idea of patter, so it worked for me though. You know. We had a splendid time going all the way down to Springfield and coming back. Welcome to my world. This is way more fun to write these books than it is to read them. Not that I dissuade you, but I research the bejesus out of these things, and I do so way to excess. I research far more than I reflect in the books, and that's because I write without a plot or an outline. I just write. I write from ignorance and curiosity. I write about what I don't know and what I'm curious to find out about. That's why if I'm in Albany, I go, oh, good Lord, I got to place a scene here because I know nothing about Albany. And on down the line. So all the things and places in book after book after book after book, they're all new to me. And what I really love to do, as well as to tell a ripping yarn, is to share these experiences with you. And last but not least, I try to wrap it up in the best English I'm capable of writing, so that you can have passages like that that have absolutely nothing to do with a murder mystery. I mean, let's face it, are we going to see a whole lot of Abigail? No! That's the most you're ever going to see of her. You know, she gave us the teeth, now she's off stage. I sort of like that, little bits and pieces of people and, you know, why people do what they do. In fact, one of my older lines, because I've done this more than once, is to explain that I don't write whodunits. In fact, I don't even read whodunits. I'm not very fond of whodunits, but I love why-dunits. I like the motivation of what gets us to do the crazy things we do. And over the years of looking at dead scenes and when I was in plainclothes doing investigations, I did sexual attacks against kids. So why do you do that? And why do you do this? Why do you do all this other stuff? I mean, I'm one of the world's happiest garbage collectors. That's what I did professionally for years and years and continue to do with the death scenes. Because of the motivation. We are a curious lot, we human beings, and we're forever inventive in sometimes unattractive ways. But I love spending time with us, usually when we least expect me to be around nosing into your business. And that's what gives me encouragement, it gives me information, and curiously it even sometimes it gives me hope, although not many people who know me would lay claim to that, but I try. I'm hoping to be hopeful. Now, if you've seen me do this before, so you guys just got to bear with me, okay? We now are lapsing into the Q&A section of the evening. Because one of the things I've never been able to answer with all my years and years and years of research and questioning and poking my nose is why in God's earth anyone would come on a cold and rainy night to hear me talk. So now's your opportunity to ask me questions and at least legitimize some part of that sacrifice on your part. Yes.
I want to thank you for giving me my very favorite quote from the book Borderlines, which was your second. That Vermont is the only family with its own state flag. Thank you.
Thank you. Good Lord, the things I give birth to. That's neat. Who else? Yes.
The horses
The horses.
in Albany. The horse scene.
St. Albans, is St. Albans Fire?
No, in here.
And the horses, yes. Yes, there are reference in this book,
I don't
Trace.
say too much.
No, that's right, I'll blow it for you. There is a scene in Albany where, of course, there are bad guys all throughout the book. After all, there are 3 stories, there's gotta be at least some bad guys. And one of them is in Albany, and the time I spent in Albany, part of it was spent with cops, surprise, surprise. You know, that's the advantage of my carrying a badge, is I always get to ride in the car with the lights in the front. And turns out backseat travel is not hard to arrange. So I'm cruising around with a guy who has spent, my kind of cop, he spent his entire life in Albany, and during his spare time, because we all have day jobs, you know, and being a cop, you can't just be a cop, you gotta do something else, because the pay is just miserable. So he's a contractor, so he would get into all these houses and work on them and rebuild them and restore them. Not fancy, he was a regular guy, so he'd work on regular houses. So he was traveling in sort of my kind of work, and then he was doing the reconstruction, so he got this amazingly broad view of the town in which he was born. Perfect guy. So I went in to see the head of the detective squad, and he put me together with this guy, John. And John and I hit the bricks and went out across Albany. And it was in the company of him that he sort of, in these wonderful throwaway comments, he refers to the mounted police. Well, we don't have no stinking mounted police in Vermont. You know, we don't even have motorcycle cops, for God's sakes. It's a miracle we have cops. We only got about 5 of them anyhow. So I went, mounted police, and of course I'm immediately thinking, oh, that's cool. You know, I've never thrown a mounted, I mean, God, Sergeant Preston, I mean, this is, and he sort of saw my enthusiasm and he said, oh, you don't know the half of it. I went, what? He said, they ride working horses, like Percherons or whatever they call them. These aren't horses. They're not like Morgans. These are mountains. I mean, these are horses that you wander under without eating the duck. That's how big they are. And he said, oh yeah, and there's a reason for that. No kidding. And they ride in twos. And there are a lot of protests in Albany. I can't imagine why, but apparently there are a lot of protests in Albany right near the Capitol building and whatnot. And these guys on these horses, apparently, all they need to do is show up. And everything quiets down. And if it doesn't quite quiet down to their liking, they just stroll into the crowd. The crowd kind of goes, and then that quiets down. And last but not least, there's a scene. I will overdo it a little bit. No, I won't tell. Okay, you got to read it. There's a scene where they do what they do, and it was so beautifully described to me. You know, the funny thing is, I never saw these guys in action. I never saw them do their stuff. I saw a couple of them from a distance, but I never got to talk with them, and I sure as hell never got the proper equipment to airlift me onto a horse. That's for sure a good thing for both of us. But the way this guy described this scene, the last Albany scene where the big horses are put to work, is the real deal. And I just stole it. It reminded me years and years ago. I wrote, you know, it might have been Borderlines, funnily enough. There's also a scene in that second book in this interminable series, in which we call them fish police in Vermont. They're fish and game or fish and wildlife, I guess you call them. And the Fish and Wildlife guy was a friend of mine, Bob. He comes by my house in full uniform because he's just off shift. And so usually what I do is I run the interview, I got a recorder, and then I say, you know, thank you very much. And then I sort of transpose the interesting parts of the recordings, and then I use those in the books. My interview with Bob was so good, it was so rich, just like the interview with these big horse riders, that I literally just went to the keyboard and wrote the scene. Boom, done. Because in the case of Borderlines, Bob had spent his entire life outside tracking human beings. And when you talk to someone like that, you enter a completely different world. So you and I all look at each other and maybe we see what they're wearing, or you know, or this bloody collar, it keeps going down. You know, color hair and stuff like that. But not Bob. Bob sees that as you walked by that bush, you partially destroyed a spider's web. And therefore, he can tell the directionality and how long ago you passed by, because, of course, the spider is driven to repair the damage, and he knows how long it takes that spider to repair that damage. That's how Bob looks at the world. Well, now that's cool company. So I, needless to say, over-interviewed Bob for a relatively short scene. But that's typical of the process. I just do that book after book after book because there are a lot of people with some really neat stuff. And we're all storytellers. We all love, especially if you got a maniac like me, just asking you, come on, give me a little bit more. You know what that's like. You know, I picked more than one brain in this room. And what's left of you will remember that. When you let go of your ego and recognize that you've got so much more to learn, despite your life experiences, that it's miserable, your level of attainment, then you can appreciate where I feel every day and why I converse the way I do, you know, extracting from some of you what you know and I know not. And then to translate that and to bring it around so that readers can enjoy by proxy what I've learned is a wonderful and rewarding thing, and I hope across the board. Case in point, this year we have a brand new paperback, which of course is called Presumption of Guilt. Yeah? Yeah, okay. And God, the knowledgeable people are nodding in the back, saying, yeah, you don't screw it up now. Okay, so Presumption of Guilt, which was last year's hardback. Well, Presumption of Guilt has that scene, the dog scene? Yeah, all right, okay. I lose track, I keep
There's a dog
forgetting.
scene in here too, dog tracking.
Oh, God, that's the,
In Albany.
oh, so I got the wrong book. Never mind about Presumption of Guilt, buy it anyhow, but don't read it for the dog scene, I got the wrong book.
Brio.
Yeah, Brio. Brio is the name of the dog. God, you're good. So there's a dog scene in here, and it's a dog handler, and they're doing it very much according to Hoyle, another bad guy who needs taken down. So, as you know, just by reading the newspaper, the use of dogs is on the increase. But they're not all they're not all drug sniffers. Some of them are used. I mean, I use cadaver dogs. That's part of what we do. Wonderful things to see. You can put them out. Take another little parentheses. Welcome to my brain. You can go out onto a body of water with a cadaver dog parked in the front of your canoe, and he will alert in the middle of the lake. Drop your anchor because there's a body 20 feet below in the mud that may have been there for several years. The dog knows it. Imagine what they can smell. Okay, so I'm introduced to Brio, who belongs to this guy. Again, another old-time clock that I've known for years. He introduces me to his dog. He's been bugging me for years. Why don't you put a dog in the book? Why don't you put a dog in the book? So I finally called him up and I said, fine, you can have your bloody dog. He couldn't have been more excited. So I went over to his place. He lives in Malta, New York. And he not only introduces me to his dog Brio, who gets special mention in the acknowledgments in this book, because he didn't pee on my foot. And he also introduces me to the scene that we visit in the book, which is an abandoned 1950s rocket testing facility. I mean, you can't walk by something like that if you're in my profession. You got to go inside to put a scene on it. So anyhow, that's what I did, and I do it in the middle of the night, accompanied by Brio. And that's an 11-page section. Well, let me tell you, I did the visit, I did the interview, I petted the dog, and all that good stuff, and I wrote the scene. And as I will do in all of these books, I'll take that scene and I'll send it to the source, whoever that may be, nuclear engineers, jewelry maker, whatever it is. And they'll look at me and go, for God's sake, man, I thought we had a conversation about this. Can't you get anything right? And thus begins the conversation. It goes back, so he would take it and he'd change a few things. But it was interesting. He said, no, at this stage of the search, the dog would no longer have its nose down. And when you begin to think like a dog, careful, this works. It makes sense. These dogs are so intuitive, so physically connected to the things that we can't imagine or see. But to them, it's like a kaleidoscope of information, and they can recognize all the various colors within. And so they know how to pursue this stuff. And once you speak their language, so to speak, you got it. And the handler, he definitely got it because he's been at it for 40 years. He's Vermont's longest certified dog handler that's where we're fishing dogs right now, in Vermont law enforcement history. That gets you the smallest footnote in history books. But in any case, by the time we were done, we had sent that 11-page section back and forth approximately 6 times for rewrites. And the last shot is mine to turn it into the most poetical language I know how to craft. This is where the words become clay, the language becomes sculpture, and the point of the exercise is to give you a good ripping time, but occasionally make you pause to just think to yourself, wow, that was well written. Because this stuff should not be brain candy. It can be entertaining, but it better be bloody well written.
Yes.
And it's the one exception to the rule, don't let them see you sweat. Because I want you to know that I'm doing the best possible work I'm capable of, even 28 books later, because that's what you deserve. We are co-storytellers in this process. You guys are filled with imagination and inventiveness. That's why you read. You want stories to come alive in your head like those movies, okay? They're mental movies. And I'm the projectionist, and I sort of give you the basics, but you supply the sounds and the smells and the color, and you know what Joe Gunther looks like. I have no clue what he looks like. That's yours. So you're co-creating these stories with me, and so if I can enhance that exercise with some carefully chosen words and phrases, if I can give you the section like I read to you, that may not be James Joyce, but it is a moment where you don't need to worry about who's going to come ripping out the door with a machine gun blazing. You can just discover a little bit about Abigail and her love of a town that all her adults refer to as a dump. A dump in the eyes of a child is a wondrous, wondrous fantasy land. And gosh, we kind of remember those days. Well, this is your way back to them by proxy. Who else got a question? Yes?
Do you have any more news about possible film series or?
We're under
TV?
contract.
You are?
Yes.
Oh,
I don't know
great.
what that means. We are.
I don't know what that
Yes, there's a guy named Brad who has perfect teeth. He's got the best smile of any young man I've ever set eyes on. I just stare at him and wonder. I have no idea what he's saying. But we're under contract, and he's talking to directors, and he's talking with other polysyllables I don't understand, and he says that he's full of hope and promise and ambition, and who knows, details at 11, I don't know, but he's certainly a lot more on the ball than some of his predecessors, because as you long-suffering co-travelers know, this is probably, what, 10th, 12th movie contract I've ever been under. But it's been a long, long time, and we haven't seen each other at the movie house. But this guy's looking good. He's looking good. Or I'm delusional. But I like him, and he seems very enthused. I also like how he came to us. So my son is a Texan. He lives down in Austin, Texas. works for Dell Computer because you have to. That's why they call rich people down in Austin Dellionaires. So he works for Dell, and he's a happy camper and a hell of a nice guy. And during one of these weekends, he decides to do good unto others as has been done unto him. So he goes to a sort of some parallel to Habitat for Humanity, and he goes out to the edge of a town. And there are a bunch of earnest young people, all with T-shirts, throwing lumber at each other and building these little houses. And he notices that the young man with really good teeth is helping him out. And furthermore, one of them, I can't remember now the passage of time. One of them has a Vermont T-shirt. And certainly the guy he's passing lumber to says, "Oh, Vermont, I love Vermont. I was actually born in Vermont." My son is astonished and said, "Well, isn't that amazing?" And before my son can say anything more, this guy, who's a bit of a chatty Cathy, as Margot, who spends enormous amounts of time on the phone with him working out all these details that I eschew, he says, "Oh yeah, I have to live down here. I have a wife and family and everything, but my favorite writer lives in Vermont." And my son goes, "Really?" Sure enough. So he says, "Oh yeah, he reads Archie Merritt's, how he keeps in touch with his Vermont roots and blah 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 blah, and carries on. And now they're getting along, and lumber hasn't been touched in 10 minutes." And my son Jonathan says, "Well, okay, isn't that cool? What do you do?" "I make movies," says the man. So there you go. That's how this started.
Wow.
Yeah. So my son got hold of us and said, "You might want to move on this." Thus we did.
Wow, that's great.
He gets 10% for that, right?
Oh yeah, no, we will
mention
not
that
forget.
yet?
We will not forget the Nor will he let me forget this. No, he's no dummy. Who else? Anybody? No, yes ma'am.
I read all your books, really enjoyed them, and I've lived in Windsor, Vermont for about 5 or 6 years, and I love Windsor, all of its, every aspect. I just love it. I'm like that girl by the railroad tracks. But with your books, I just keep thinking, why doesn't he ever place one of his stories in Windsor? It's like you cover everywhere in Vermont, but you just keep avoiding Windsor, and I wanted you to write about Windsor.
Yeah.
So hearing this.
There you go. Buy 3 books.
I feel. Thank you.
That way you can just frame one. Don't need to read them. I don't care if you don't read them. Yeah, no, the nice thing is that there are approximately 350 towns in Vermont, more or less, kind of, sort of. I know because the 350 Club, or whatever they call themselves, gave me an honorary pin years ago because I drive around so much. But I just never run out of either ideas or locations to place those ideas. And most of the time, a place like Windsor, I go to Windsor all the time because they, like every other hospital around, kills people on a regular basis. So I go up to their hospital in the middle of the night to do the medical examiner job. You're having way too much fun. I don't want to know what that's about. So Windsor was literally just waiting in place, and when the sergeant got promoted, he left Bellows Falls and ended up in Windsor. Then it was just too good. So every place has its swing at bat, and some, obviously, like Brattleboro, they just get to swing again and again and again because it's a big town and it's near where I live. God, yeah, I mean, St. Albans. You just look at the map of Vermont, and there's no rational cause for me to ever run out of ideas for books. Just, they are a largely physical series of books. They are all about location, the state of Vermont and its inhabitants and its towns, our characters as much as Willie, Sammy, Lester, and Joe. Yes.
I was curious when you were being introduced about you writing for AAA Travel.
Yeah.
How did you get into that?
AAA Travel, that was the question. How during the introduction, Liza lied a lot, but that one she got right. The question is, how did I fall into that assignment? I've fallen out of it, by the way. They haven't called me in several years, but for a while I was on a roll and cranking them out. I frankly, I'm trying to remember, I didn't contact them. Someone reached out to me and said, these guys are great, they're hands-off, they pay well, and they're sort of, they'll let you do what you want to do. At one point or another, I was on this sort of completely unrelated trip, and I went to Morocco, Marrakesh, Morocco, which I don't really recommend to anybody, by the way, but I went there and all of a sudden thought, oh, I could pay for the passage here. So I wrote an article for AAA, Northern New England Journeys AAA. I mean, it's a specialized part of the AAA, and they bought it. And then they duplicated it 3 times over for the other AAA magazines across the United States, so I got 3 times the pay. I made a profit on vacation. Never did it again, because I figured it would never come up that well. So I've stopped vacationing several years ago. But that was the upshot to that. And I would occasionally cross horns with the subsequent editor. That really was the beginning of the end, is that rumor has it, I don't know where this came from, but in order for me to work with anyone, they've got to have a sense of humor. So Dot, or Dottie, depending on how you refer to Dorothy, used to be the editor, and she and I shared this wicked sense of humor. Also, she rides motorcycles. That's definitely appeals to my inner nature. So that was a match made in heaven, and I wrote all these articles for her. Then Dottie ran opposed to the bureaucracy of AAA, and that was the end of her. So she left and was replaced by probably the single most humorless human being I've ever met. And we lasted 1 article. And I went, if I can't write for laughs, I'm not writing for you. I mean, the money may be good, but the human connection is key. So that was it. And she clearly didn't like me either. 1 crack too many. So that was it. She stopped calling me. But it was they're always trolling. If you're interested in doing, don't hesitate to contact them.
Well, I'm curious how your fiction writing works with that, because don't you have to be a little more factual with?
Oh, no, my fiction writing, the question is, isn't that in contrast to my fiction writing? I'm a trained historian. I used to write history books.
Right.
That's my degree in college. I used to be a newspaper writer before then. I mean, I've compulsively written for most of my life. And if you want to parallel a musician, that's my musical instrument is language. So it's the way I write my books, this quote-unquote fiction, as you've discovered, I am using the historical research process. I do the interviews, I go on site, I find out what's real, and I have come to anticipate my readers' expectations that what you read is going to be accurate. So horses in Albany are going to look like those horses in Albany, or I'll catch hell. I got to get that stuff right. I can't just make stuff up. And for a brief period in my life, I used to go to mystery writer conventions. And that's when I discovered I wasn't a mystery writer, because I cared about you guys, I cared about the research, I cared about the use of language, and nobody else in the room in those conventions seemed to break that kind of sweat. To them it was kind of, research, you don't really need to do research, that's what Google's for, or whatever. The idea of going out there and yeah, Google's fine, but you can't smell Google or hear Google or get the sense of three-dimensionality from that screen. You need to get there, and you need to talk to the inhabitants and find out what their likes and dislikes and prejudices, outlooks and hopes and dreams and disappointments are. That's all history. But I lie about the end result. Yes.
Your next book.
Next book. Well, I can tell you that for the moment, the next book, I'm repeating the question. The next book, 29, is currently entitled, he says carefully, Bury the Lead. Now that's an old newspaper phrase, and the beginning of any article, also called the hook. That's another thing I learned on how to write a book, is grab them early and leave them feeling good too. So your beginning and your end better be good. The middle can be trash, doesn't matter. So burying the lead means that you started a process and you never really got to the meat of the story. So the reader thinks you're going down a certain path and that it's not the path you end up with and all the rest. Now, one of the characters is the state medical examiner. She has a daughter, and the daughter finally graduates from college, and she gets a job as a photographer for a newspaper. She's the allusion to journalism, and she plays a very big role in the book. And the book also I went to C&S Grocers and interviewed all the brass there and wandered around, and then I asked them, okay, so how do you kill people? How do you cheat? How do you rip the company off? You know, and they were great. They went, oh, cool. Absolutely. Let me tell you how do you do this. So they took C&S, and then I changed it to a different name, and I put it in White River Junction. So we're going to we're going to trash White River, and I put the warehouse there, and do terrible things to the warehouse. But since it doesn't exist, who cares? But the whole infrastructure was my education came from the C&S guys. And then I refer to C&S, you gotta be very careful about that, so that they can't, oh, you wrote about C&S. No, C&S is actually referenced on page 3 once. So I'm off the hook, and they can't sue me. So that's, God, I can't remember anything else about book 29, but there you go. There are no dogs, as it turns out.
Maybe a cat?
Yes, ma'am. Always a cat. Joe has a cat. Gilbert. Yeah.
I'm willing to suspend my disbelief except for one thing. And that's Willie and Sammy are great parents and have this wonderful little girl.
Yeah.
But they're VBI detectives and they're off all the time.
Yeah.
But there's never any explanation about how these people can be so busy doing their work, and this child is there, and any two working parents know that it's not that easy to get that child covered under those circumstances.
I got one word for you. Louise. And she's referenced throughout. And in this book you'll see, and in the next book, because Emma's getting older.
Yeah.
So she's no longer just something you pass around and sort of leave in the back of a squad car. As she begins to toddle, she's actually aging, God forbid. She's the only character in the books that ages. I'll stop that soon. But Emma is passed around, admittedly, in the very beginning of the first book that references her. And then we go to Louise. Louise is a retired cop. Her kids are older in our house. And Louise is on short order by both Sam and Willie. And references are going to be made in this book and in number 29 as to the parenting. So your point is precisely addressed as to who's got Emma. And Emma's going to be a tough self-starter because, by God, just like my daughter, I used to go to crime scenes and whatnot, and I'd bring my daughter. And she would just stay in the car and look at all the bright lights and whatnot. And you should have seen her artwork. They always featured bright lights. And that's what Dad was,
All you have to do is look at her parents.
Yeah, well, exactly.
I mean, Willie and Sammy, come on.
Yeah, no, it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. And focusing on Emma and making sure that Emma is referenced in that context that you're concerned about is a key and important part of the books. As the books progress, there has been an evolution. The very first books in the series were sort of more hardware, more police procedural, more nuts and bolts and whatnot. And now, and I'll thank Margot for this, she's been an extraordinary influence. She's my primary editor. And so she reads the very first manuscripts, and her invaluable insight to all this thing is, get more into the people. And she says, I got that, and I got that you started the ball rolling with how so-and-so feels about something, but we need more. Now, give me a little bit more. And so over a process of several books, this last one she read, number 29, of course you can't prove you're wrong because it's not here, but she actually, of course she may be lying, I haven't looked at her notes yet, but she told me that she read the whole book very quickly because, by God, I fairly evenly hit the points, those interrelational, emotional points like that, to her satisfaction. So, feeling special tonight. But it's key, and so are you. And so, thank you.